In today's video, we are going to be talking all about R Shiny and building dashboards that are dynamic. So we can play around with user input, whether that's like a slider or the user putting in a number, and we can show how we can output different outputs, maybe statistical measures or tables or some sort of visualization based on the user input. So before we get into the coding, let's take a look at a couple of examples of R Shiny projects. I'll show you a few dashboards and then I'll show you another interactive app that one of my colleagues built. The first one that I'll show you is based on cancer data in the United States. So the user can select whether they want to show all cancer types or a specific one. Maybe I want to look here at breast cancer. And we could group data by year. The user can look at different years, so maybe I only want to look at recent cases. And it allows the user to choose different measures that they want to investigate. So maybe I only want to look at, for example, these three. And I click this Update Data button, and it's going to then generate tables based on my user input. So I could make it maybe a couple more years, get a longer table, different formats of the table. If you remember our tidy data lecture, we talked about wide versus long format. And there's even a separate tab where we can look at these plots that are based on our user input. So if I put it all the way down to 1990, then my plot should also be dynamic and update based on this input. My colleague Katie also utilized R Shiny to build a more interactive learning application. So here we're looking at kind of an ocean with a bunch of different sea creatures, and we're talking about sampling. So maybe the user is interested in looking at the differences between simple random sampling, stratified clustered convenience sampling. You can choose the number of clusters perhaps. We can sample, and we're going to see that this is actually done in real time. It's going to output the counts of the sample versus the actual population. And we can kind of compare what happens when we use different sample sizes for different types of sampling schemes. So this is a really cool interactive learning app that's not really a dashboard, but still utilizes R Shiny in a very clever way. So we're just going to talk briefly about kind of the structure of an R Shiny app, how to make one in RStudio, and then we're going to follow an example by Dean Atali. I hope I'm pronouncing their name correctly. And I'll link the tutorial in the description, and we're just going to follow along that together to replicate this example using BC liquor prices. If it's your first time using Shiny, then you probably need to install the Shiny package. We'll just use install.packages Shiny. It will probably ask you to update or restart R. That's totally fine, you can do so. And then we're ready to just make a Shiny app. There are a couple ways to do this. You could create a .r file called app.r and start coding from scratch. But RStudio actually has a file that you can load using a Shiny web app. So I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm just going to call this BC Liquor. So that's the app we are eventually going to build. I want everything within a single app. You can use multiple files, but we're starting simple here. And I'm just going to save it on my desktop. When you load in this R Shiny web app, it's actually going to give you a demo app. So let's actually just look through that first. To run the app, you can click this green play button called Run App, and it's going to just show you a demo of a Shiny app along with the code. So we'll go through that. In this example, we're looking at the Old Faithful geyser data, and we're looking at the waiting time to the next eruption in minutes and its distribution. So the user input, what we can do is actually use this slider to determine the number of bins that makes up the histogram. So we could have 1 bin, which is not useful, 3 bins, all the way up to 50 bins. And the user can look at how this changes in real time. So let's go through the code of what this looks like. I'm just going to put them side by side. Okay, so we start by loading in the Shiny library, and we have 3 components. We have a UI, which is the user interface. This is mostly the appearance of the app, where things are located, and also defines the user input. Then we have a server, and this is the logic required to do the computation. So in this case, it's going to create this histogram output. And then we have the Shiny app function, which combines or assembles the UI and the server together. Basically, the UI is saying where things are and what they are. So first we have a title panel, that's pretty intuitive. We have a sidebar layout, so that's anything along the sidebar here. We have a sidebar panel, so an individual component within the sidebar, and we're going to say that it's the number of bins, and it's a slider from 1 to 50 with a default value of 30. And the input is going to be assigned to an object called bins. And this is going to be important when we look at the next function where we're going to be defining some output. Then we have a main panel that's kind of over here. And this is going to give some plot output of a plot, which we will be assigning to an object called distplot. So we're not actually calculating anything here, but we're saying where things are going to be arranged in the app. For the server, it's actually a function with some input. So here would be our bins and some outputs, which here is our histogram. We are basically going to take in whichever number that we defined based on the slider, which we call bins, and generate a histogram using this code. Just make this a bit bigger for now. So we have a histogram where the breaks are the number of bins. That's exactly what we defined in our slider input. And we just give it some other output and some choices. So for example, we put the colors dark gray. I could change this to blue if I wanted and reload the app. It's just going to make all those bins blue. Then the Shiny app takes the UI and the server together and builds the app. So this is a relatively simple example that kind of was built for us. Let's talk about how we would build this from scratch. What I'm going to do is just remove anything in this fluid page function, remove this kind of preamble here, remove anything in the server function, and this is really the scaffolding of our Shiny app. I'm just going to remove the comments. And this is a starting point for us. So let's go through that BC Liquor example from Di Natale together and build an app from scratch. Okay, so to build this app, we do need some data from BC Liquor. I've just downloaded this CSV from the tutorial that I linked in the description. So you can do the same and just save it in the same folder as your app.r. So mine was BC Liquor, which is a folder on my desktop. And you'll also see that it should appear in your workspace here. In order to use this data set, we need to load it into R. And we are going to call it BCL. And I'm just going to use the read.csv function with strings as factors set to false. To look at this, I can just run this line of code and in my console look at the first couple of rows of BCL, and I can see the type of information that the data set has. If you're having trouble loading this in, it might be because we're not really working in an R project here. I know this is bad, but you can set your working directory to be the source file location. So that's just saying that within this kind of R working environment, that your just working directory is set to that BC Liquor folder. So it's okay for this R Shiny app to do that, and you can always confirm with getwd to see what your working directory is. But because we're not in an R project, it might not automatically know what your working directory is, so you may have to set that manually. Okay, so let's set some text within our page. Let's see what happens when we just put BC Liquor Store and prices into this fluid page. We can always run the app when we are working through this, and it's basically just going to add text here. So it's nothing fancy. We're probably going to have to assign this to like a title or a subtitle or something. So after defining a title page, I also want to have some things appear on the side panel and the main panel. So I'm going to add this code, which has our sidebar layout. So the sidebar panel is where our inputs are going to go. And then we're also going to have some stuff go in the main panel. Right now I'm just having strings. So the text is just going to appear where they should in the app. And I'll show you exactly where all these are going to go. So that we have a little sidebar panel here, and we have the main panel. So in this app, we're going to be looking at different items in the BC Liquor catalog, and maybe we want the user to be able to filter by price. So maybe there's a specific price range of different alcohol items that the user wants to pay. And we could maybe use a slider input where it has a minimum and maximum, and we'll only filter and show options for drinks that fall within that range. So that's an example of an input. So next we're going to build a slider input. So here in the sidebar panel, that's where I think the slider should go. We're just going to replace our text with the following code. So we're going to give it a slider input, and it's going, whatever we decide is going to be the price input. It's going to have a title of price ranging from 0 to 100. The default value is going to be between 25 and 40, and it's going to be in dollar format. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So here we're going to have 2 sliders, and we will eventually be able to filter liquor based on this range. Now we may also want the user to be able to say which type of liquor they're looking for. So we are going to be using what we call a radio button, and you'll see what that looks like in a second. So after this, inside the sidebar panel, we're going to add another input of a radio button, and it's just going to allow us to select if we want beer, refreshment, spirits, wine, and by default it will select wine. And this is what it looks like. So by default it selects wine, but it allows the user to select other product types. For now, only one. Maybe we're also picky about where the liquor comes from, so we can add another option where the user can select the country. For now, we're just going to look at Canada, France, and Italy, but we will eventually show you how to select any country that's included in the data set. So let's look at this. Now we have a drop-down list for country. This first item, price input, type input, country input, is going to be relevant to our output later. So that's what our kind of input is going to get assigned to an R object, and this is going to be the name. The second one is just the title, and then we have different choices. Let's assume that for now, our main panel is going to contain some sort of plot. We're going to put a placeholder here for now because we haven't actually built the plot. That will come after the server, but we know it's eventually going to be a plot output. And for now, we're just going to title it cool plot. We can change that later. And maybe we want a table along with that. So we could have table output, and we'll just call it cool table for now. So at this point, adding those outputs into the main panel doesn't actually do anything because we don't have anything called cool output or cool table or cool plot. It just looks the same, but we can test that these are selectable and see kind of the vision of what the app will eventually look like. Okay, so we've kind of done the easy part, the fun part, we're kind of editing what the app is going to look like, but now we actually have to define the server logic and build, for example, the plots and the tables that we want to output. Okay, so we know that we want to output eventually a plot and a table. Let's start with the plot. So we are going to, the syntax is saying output $, whatever I call this, cool plot. And this is going to be a rendered plot. And let's see what happens when we make a ggplot. So I'm going to use that BC liquor data. I'm going to plot based on alcohol _ content and create a histogram to see, well, how many options do I have within that given eventually alcohol content. Right now, it does not take into any user input, but we can see what the app is going to look like. So I have it basically from 0 to 100 and all of my options, but when I change any of these user inputs, it's not updating yet because I just said plot that data set and I have nothing to do with the user inputs. So let's put that together. Well, we're going to take the BC liquor data set and we could pipe this into the ggplot function. This will give me the exact same output as before. I'm just kind of cleaning it up. Exactly the same. But by piping, I could say, well, maybe I want to do some filtering. So I'm going to set the price to be greater than or equal to whatever my input was for the price, which remember, there were 2 components. I have a minimum and a maximum. So the first one is the minimum, and I can repeat that for the maximum and say if it's less than or equal to the maximum. And I also have some filters for the type of alcohol. Well, that was the type input and country. So I'll remind you, these are the column names of that BC liquor data set. So I have alcohol _ content, I have country, I have type. those are in the data set, and these are my user inputs. So continue the pipe that into the ggplot, and let's see what happens. Now I should be able to customize the range of prices that I want to look at. So maybe I want cheap wine, anything under $20 wine. I could look at beer, I could look at other refreshments, but I want to look at wine, and maybe I want to be fancy and get some from Italy. These are the number of options that I have. So that's telling me how many options I have, but maybe I also want a table. So let's build the table as well. Well, we called this, oops, this is the plot, that's finished. Can make it look better later too, no problem. So I have cool table, and instead of rendering a plot, I'm going to render a table. And I'm basically just going to output this kind of filtered table. Don't need to do anything else. And I also want to note that I added this BR just to add some breaks in between the plot and the table. So I'll remove them first and show you what this looks like. So I have a plot and a table. Maybe I want to add a little bit of space between them, just a kind of aesthetic choice. Whoops. Get a little bit more space. And now I can actually see, well, if I wanted my cheap wine under $20 from Italy, I can actually see my options here. It's going to output the alcohol content, the sweetness, the subtype, things like that. And of course, I could also sort this from the lowest to highest price or the lowest to highest alcohol content, whatever you want to do. You are welcome to add more into this pipe. So you could arrange by, say, price. Find my cheap wine from Italy, and it will arrange it from the lowest to highest price. Now you may be wondering if there's a way to reduce kind of copying and pasting that code. And yes, there is. We have to do something and create a reactive variable. So it's not as easy as just saying, well, let's call this BCL underscore filtered. I'll just show you exactly what I mean. This is what I originally would have done. And I could have said, oh, well, let's just plot BCL underscore filtered here and just output BCL underscore filtered here. But this is actually not going to work. So it says that we have price input outside of a reactive consumer. So I will show you how to write this in the code, but if you want to read more about reactive programming, then in that tutorial there is a lovely kind of discussion about reactive programming. So here, instead of writing it this way, we are going to call it using this reactive function. Put everything inside of those brackets. Then from here, we can call BCL underscore filtered is more of a, kind of think of it like a function than it is a standard variable. Mine are the wrong way. And now this works. So you're not repeating it as much, but you have to remember that the BCL underscore filtered is now a reactive variable instead of just kind of a variable like that. So you have to add the brackets there. Anyway, not the kind of point of this video, but you can read more about it if you're interested. Okay, so as I said before, we only considered 3 countries here, but there is actually a way to just say, well, give me all of the unique countries from the data and allow me to select on them. So we are going to replace this line of code here. We're going to use uiOutput country. Then within our server, before we do kind of the plot and the table, we are going to look at the country output. We're going to use the render UI function. We're going to use that select input function again, which was previously in kind of up here, but now it's down here. I know it's a little bit strange. This is our country input from the country column in our data set. And we're going to get them by sorting our unique BC Liquors $country variables, our columns, and we're just going to by default put Canada as our default. Oh, just missed a T here. No problem. And now I actually have all of the possible countries generated here. Now you could code this so that you only get, like, if you select refreshments, you only get countries with refreshments, because there's some countries here that don't have any wine, for example, or within that range, but it does give a little bit more flexibility there. Okay, so just to review, we have used ggplot and tidyverse along with the Shiny app. We loaded in the BC Liquor data, which is just a CSV. We created a UI for the application that tells us what the app looks like. We have defined some server logic which helps us calculate things that are relevant for the app. And we've constructed the app together using this Shiny app function. You can find the whole code for this on the course website or in that tutorial that I've linked in the description. Again, thank you so much to Dean for putting together this tutorial. I hope you found this helpful, and we'll be exploring more in class to talk about Shiny. Thanks for listening.